At the beginning, I would like to express a big thanks to Atacama and especially Dominic and Bara to support our community and for all these things. I would like to do it a little bit introduction. I am Irka and I'm software engineer. I like programming in Kotlin and Java language, and today I would like to introduce our open source. There is a table of contents. About the first topic, I would like to introduce why we choose to participate on our open source. And the second one will be the main features. Then Tomas will describe a little bit deep dive about our open source. And third topic will be about the demo, when Tomas would like to show you how does it work. And the last thing will be questions and answers. Our mission. Why we started programming open source. At the beginning, I have a dream. I would like to participate on some kind of open source, but I never find a way how I can be a part of it. And because we are started this community, and I try to do it the things in a little bit different way, and I don't want to do this community only a static community to create only meetups, but I would like to be a dynamic community when we can build something bigger, some kind of open source, and I would like to contribute something to our IT community to give something back, because there are a lot of open source libraries, there are a lot of SDKs which we are using every day, and this is why we decide we would like to contribute something. Yes, as I said, and why we choose the SDK. It was interesting thing too, because we had brainstorming when we tried to find what we can do, when we can start it, and there were a lot of things, and this is why I'm very happy about the brainstorming, because if you are part of the brainstorming, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of things what you can do, and there were many things, but one of the most valuable and interesting thing was the Zoom, because Tomas had a lot of experience about the implementation, the Zoom API, and for developers, they are struggle with implementing this big and complex REST API, and for us it was because Tomas has experience, and for us it was a main thing when we can participate and when we would like to go and try to build something interesting and contribute something to the community. And the main thing is we would like to help the developers, because Zoom SDK don't have a Zoom API don't has a SDK for backend developers, and because both we are the backend developers, we decide it would be very good to implement it. And for example, Tomas will say a little bit more detail, but for example, authentication and authorization is a big pain when you want to use this Zoom API. And this is all for me, and I am handing over to Tomas.
All right, thanks for joining us for this talk. I just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Tomas Zezula, and I'm a backend developer. So being a backend developer, I'm oftentimes faced with tasks like integrations. like integrate with Zoom, integrate Google SSO, integrate with payment gateway, whatnot. And when I was working with Zoom, I realized it's a great platform, but it's also complex. And this project, this open source project, obviously, as many others, came out of my personal frustration and struggle with Zoom APIs. So as Jirka explained, there's nothing for really backend developers there. They do have SDKs, but they serve for the visualization. If you want to embed meetings into a front end or mobile app, that's the SDK is definitely there. But there's nothing for us backenders who would love to look at the data or ingest the data easily. So as Jirka described most of it, let me just move on to the next slide, which is project goals. So first and foremost, it's the project is like a toolkit for Kotlin and Java developers that's made to make their lives easier. And there's some specific goals like we currently are working on, which is simplified authentication, because Zoom provides or supports a lot of authentication protocols. Some of them are less complex, others are more complex, so we want to make the integration with them easier. And also another big topic, and I've seen a lot of useful use cases with that, is ingesting events from Zoom. They provide a whole lot of events and webhooks, and I feel like there could be a better support for that use case. So on a technical level, we chose Kotlin, and all the execution when you interact with the SDK is asynchronous. It's using Kotlin coroutines, which is useful, for instance, when you're handling data from webhooks, because the expectation is that you handle the data in the background and you immediately return a successful answer or response to Zoom. Otherwise, they will keep sending you the same event or the same request all over again. But obviously, with coroutines and Kotlin, it would be quite a niche project for like only some developers or those who use these features. So obviously, you want to address the vast Java community as well. So you can use the SDK with Java features, or even you can make blocking calls if you want to. And that's hopefully, covers more use cases. Also, modularity, because Zoom API is complex. Zoom is a beast. It's packed with features, and there are meetings, there are webinars, there's user management, there's a lot. And each of these is like a specific domain. So we wanted to break it down into manageable chunks. Currently, we have a module for authorization and meeting or user management. And then finally, part of my frustration was that whenever I had to integrate something with Zoom, I ended up writing my Zoom client all over from scratch. So the SDK internally uses an HTTP client, because on a higher level, the SDK is just like a wrapper around REST API calls, so it's all HTTP. So there's a client pre-configured, but you can always plug in your own. And currently, we only support Ktor, but in the future, we definitely want to add more libraries so that we cover more broader audience. All right, so when using the SDK, what can you expect? So as I said, currently it helps with authorization via OAuth 2 protocol. It also supports server-to-server OAuth, which is like doesn't involve the end user, so it's a bit simpler. It seamlessly handles webhook events, meaning it provides methods that let you subscribe to particular events and then handle just the happy case scenario, and then meeting management. In the near future, we are thinking of adding user management, which I think might be interesting for corporate clients, for people or companies who have Zoom accounts and company accounts. So that might be interesting for them. Cloud recordings, I think that's a huge use case there, where Zoom with cloud recordings, they let you know when the cloud recording is ready. then you can download it and then possibly store it in some storage system like Amazon S3 or somewhere else. Integration with queue systems, because Zoom collects and lets you know of specific information about how the meeting went, what was the video or audio quality, who left the meeting, how long did it last, etc. So you can ingest all that and again feed it into some internal queue in your application, in your system, which might enhance your analytics. And definitely metrics and monitoring, so detailed metrics about failed API requests, latencies, retries, or when you are subject to rate limiting due to excessive calls to Zoom API, so that all can be packaged into the SDK and there could be plugin for collecting metrics on that. So how does it work? So delving slightly into the code leading up to my demo. My gut feeling was, or our gut feeling was, when creating the API, that it should be easy. But disclaimer is, you need to start with Zoom. Like, you actually need to register your application in Zoom Marketplace. You need to enable, authorization. You need to define scopes you need. And then Zoom gives you credentials, gives your application a client ID and client secret, which you can then use to instantiate the SDK. So we call it just Zoom. And then when working with it, as I said, it's modularized. So if you want to work with meetings, then Zoom.meetings provides you with the module that knows how to handle meetings. For example, you can list scheduled meetings of a particular user. And now the result is the Kotlin's result types, meaning you either receive a success or a failure. If it's a failure, there will be an exception wrapped into that and you can inspect it. Or if you don't like pattern matching, you can also wrap it into an extension method we call just call. In that case, it's still non-blocking, it uses coroutines, but it either returns the data or it throws an exception. So based on what you prefer, you can choose either or. There's actually more. But before I delve into it, here's the more complicated OAuth 2 flow, which involves the end user. So for that, you need an authorization module, which returns the authorization URL. The localhost 8080/callback, that's the URL you have registered in Zoom for your particular application. And then the authorization URL redirects the user to Zoom. The user authenticates towards Zoom. And then at the end, when the authorization is successful, authentication is successful, your server will receive that call, on that callback endpoint will receive one-time access code, which then the SDK can help you exchange for a long-lived access token and a refresh token. So the user tokens, that's where the authorization calls authorize the user using the code sent by Zoom. You don't have to do all the work and know all the details what are needed to exchange that code for access token. The SDK will do that for you. And then you can instantiate the meetings SDK with the user tokens and access user-related data more easily. Now, when it comes to designing how it all works and the developer experience, we were particularly thinking of like exception handling, and I don't think that we need to. I think like we need to give options. Either there's this group of people who like pattern matching, and others who don't like it so much. So by default, as I said, it returns the result type, in which case you need to pattern match. That's okay, it's just quite verbose. And notice that you also need to call like get or throw if you want to access the data, or when accessing exceptions. So if you're tired of that, then you can just wrap your calls into the call extension method, and then you will either get the data directly or you face an exception and need to handle it. As I said, Java interop, so all API calls are by default suspendable. They must be called from a coroutine. But if you work with Java or if you don't use coroutines, you can turn it into completable future. So instead of using call, you use call async, and that gives you completable future. Same thing is for blocking calls. So you can use call sync, and the call will block the current thread until the result is available, or it throws an exception. All right, so now with that, there's a time for demo time, just to get you a feel for what it's like to work with it. And the first part of the demo is a command line tool. It's not part of the SDK. It's just think of it as an application of the SDK. It's a command line tool that allows me to use terminal to log into Zoom and get my data from Zoom. So first thing I'm doing here, I hope it's visible. I'm starting a web server that knows how to listen to Zoom callbacks. And then the other terminal, I'm just going to ask the command line tool. I made up the name. It's called Zoom CLI. So I'm asking the tool to log me in, or rather help me to log in. So what it does, it generates this authorization URL, authentication URL, which when I visit it, I'm forwarded to Zoom, and then I use my Google account to log in. So once I log in, I get a response that supposedly authorization is successful, and I can close the tab. So let me do that. And if I return back to my command line, I can see that authorization server indeed acknowledged that I have been logged in. So I must be authenticated. So now if I ask for my meetings, say, so again, a command I made up, I just said like list meetings, list my meetings, my scheduled meetings. What it does, it goes to Zoom using my access token, and it's able to pull data from Zoom. So this JSON here is exactly what I have in my in my meetings in the Zoom web console. So these are just some test meetings I created, and their content is reflected here. So that's one use case. If you look at the implementation here, so this is a simple command line utility. The web server is just KTOR server, which uses this call here to authorize. It captures the one-time access code sent by Zoom. That's all the work it has to do to parse it out from the request query parameters, and then it calls the API to the SDK to receive the user tokens, which it then stores in an in-memory database. And in my list meetings commands, all I do is fetch those tokens from the database, instantiate the SDK with them, and then I'm simply making a blocking call, because at this point I just want to print out the result. There's no need for async operation here, so I call blocking call and receive the data for my user. So that's one use case. And then other use case I wanted to show. The typical use case would be a web application. So I'm running a web server, probably like Spring Boot web server, and I want to use something that helps me communicate with Zoom. In this case, this scenario, it's when I actually want to capture some webhook events from Zoom and handle that. So the way it works, so I spin up my Spring Boot application. It starts a Tomcat server, And OK. Now, here I need to mock it a little bit because otherwise it would be a bit too complex for the simple demo. But let's say I'm simulating an event coming from Zoom where the body is, it describes a meeting that has just been created. There's some headers to it as well. So each incoming request from Zoom needs to be verified that it's legit. That's what the signature header is for, and the timestamp header. So once I send that request, I immediately receive 200 OK. And then if I go back to my server, I can see that it printed out the event. So first, it responded to Zoom that, OK, I received your event. And then it processed the data in the background and printed out to the console. So the way this works, so this could be Java. I wrote it in Kotlin because I was lazy, but it could be Java. And the way it works is in this webhook controller. I'm using completable future call async, which internally uses this subscription. Whenever there is a meeting created, please, handle that, and then handle the happy case, and let me handle the happy case scenario. So in this case, I deal with a data class called meeting created event, which describes the event from Zoom. And I choose to, as a developer, I just handle this happy case, and every other, error handling or invalid request, that's handled by the SDK itself. And since I only subscribe for meeting created event, since I'm subscribed for that, if I clear the console and go back to here, the Postman, and try to send some other valid event like meeting started, and I send it, I again receive, my server acknowledges the receipt, but in this case, it will not print out any data because I have not subscribed for that event. So that's essentially like selective subscription and handling of all the intricacies in the background by the SDK. I did a similar, pretty much the same application using Ktor. So the only difference here would be that it's now starting Netty as opposed to Tomcat. If I call meeting created, I again get a success response and it prints out the meeting data. But because the SDK uses Ktor internally, it provides some better user experience. Sorry. It provides some better user experience. So if I go to routing, sorry, not that one. Let me just go to, here. In this case, instead of parsing the request body and all the headers, I just take the request as is, which in Ktor is called application call, and I just feed that request into the SDK, and just leave it up to the SDK to, process the request. And then again, I'm asking it to just let me handle the happy case scenario when I have the successfully passed event. Let me handle that, which in this case, I just printed out to the console. So these are two different use cases that hopefully show some level of flexibility of the SDK could be used. One was the command line tool, and then the other is a web application, web server. So yeah, I think that's pretty much wraps it up. So thanks again for joining me in this talk. The QR code leads to the public repository of the project. And yeah, with that, thanks a lot for your attention and time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So I used to lead an open source project for some time. So yeah, I have some I have a lot of questions.
Okay,
But yeah,
that's good.
if I limit it to one, so as I could see, you talk to Zoom with REST API.
Yes.
But do you also integrate with the local Zoom? So I don't know. Can you start a call using your API?
So right now it's only using REST API as a proof of concept, but I know that Zoom also exposes GraphQL, for instance. So if that makes sense, we can try to integrate with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, can you start the call using your...
Oh, start the call from the...
Yeah.
Not at this time. So we're just trying to prove how it would all work, but obviously the plan is to build up functionality. So if starting the call is the thing, if that's something that would be appreciated by backend developers, then we will look into that. All right.
Thank you very much. Question number 2.
Okay. Just there were some at least I've seen that there are some Kotlin specific things which are not easily accessible in the Java world, like extension function, for example.
Yeah, it's true.
The question is you probably needed to somehow provide some way how to make it accessible in the Java world easily.
Yeah, the interop.
Let's say freely without any plumbing. I have pretty experience about it, so I'm basically know. And the question is, have you written in Kotlin or Java?
So right now it's only Kotlin, but I recognize.
We just used Kotlin to do the additional plumbing for the Java.
Yeah, right now it's an infancy stage, but I reckon we might have to write also parts in Java. We'll see.
I was really,
you know.
whether we'll somehow consider what's the pro and cons for this part of the project.
Well, obviously, if we could just use Kotlin, it would be great for efficiency and productivity. But I'm afraid it won't be sufficient in the long run. So we might have to write a Java version of the SDK eventually as well. We'll see.
Okay, thank you.
Short question about CLI tool. Is or will it be part of this project?
Okay, that's a good question. It might. Well, I separated it because that's not the SDK, but actually, I badly miss tool like that with Zoom. I use some other platform called Stripe for payment processing. They have exactly that. They allow you to do a lot from command line. And Zoom,
I know Zoom doesn't provide.
They don't have that, and it's a tool I would like to have. So I can imagine it could be like a sub-project or part of the initiative. Yes.
Do you compile it like native executable, or is it just jar?
Currently it's just a jar. It's my lack of experience with tooling like that, But I would love to have executable. Yeah.
And maybe one more question.
Yeah.
The last one.
No worries.
The global question about the motivation of this project. Was it your interest?
Right. No, it's partly frustration, really. And also, I don't like to repeat myself. So I just would love to, write things once and just make them work in every project.
But what kind of project?
So, the project could be that you need to handle Zoom meetings in your backend application.
Internal project for some company.
Yes. For instance, the commercial project. Project with Zoom better be commercial because they're not cheap. With free account you won't get much. So if you want cloud recordings, already it's paid. So you better be using it for commercial purposes. So yeah. All right, cool, thanks.
So guys, thank you again. Big applause for Ilka and Tomas.
Thank you.